Dave, was it you who wrote me about the Numanthia, saying that it was one of your come to Jesus moments when you first tasted it?
Yeah, Numanthia was
Yeah.
one of my introductions to Spanish wines, and
it's interesting because it's so vastly different from everything else on the phenolics now. And even when you look at the whole sort of terroir and everything, 700 meters above sea level, climatic difference, the climatic range is -11 to 37 degrees every season. So that's some pretty serious climatic conditions. And something I didn't know about Toro as a region is that when the phylloxera hit in Spain, in Europe, it was one of the very few places that managed to avoid it, primarily because of the sandy soil and just incredible stretch of altitude. They actually ended up sending a lot of their rootstock to the French. Which I'm sure still annoys the French.
Yeah, I don't think they talk about that.
No, probably not. I just put down for you guys in the chat thing there the range of alcohol. I was talking to Haosheng earlier, not Haosheng, Leon, about alcohol in Spain, and we're certainly seeing the tippy point of it. I couldn't find in my research the Muga and what the alcohol percentage is, and it's at an early stage now. I can't really fathom it. I'm not getting anything overtly alcoholic on the nose. I think this might be the first time I've tasted it, the 11. It might be the last because we don't have any more.
So Robert, can you repost that in the chat? I wasn't in the chat, so I missed.
Yeah, sure. What, the alcohol levels?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, just a second. Figure it out. All right, 7 o'clock, so let's kick off. Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year. It's quite auspicious that we're doing this tasting, and I'm really glad that I had the wherewithal to figure out lifting the wines for the tasting at the beginning of December, because most of these wines are now done and dusted. There's actually none of it available anymore, particularly Mogador. I was just on the phone to the winery about half an hour ago, seeing what the lay of the land is in terms of their plans for this year. Haosheng, you'll see the lineup. It's in the email, and it's exactly as the website listing is in terms of the lineup of the wines. So it looks like Mogador is having a change of distribution in Singapore. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to show these wines again to you, but it certainly remains as one of my favorites. So I'm glad that we're looking at that tonight. So maybe we should just kick off with the Clos Mogador Nelin, #1 first. Rated by Luis Gutierrez at Wine Advocate as one of the most important white wines in Spain. And I can kind of get his point of view. It's mainly Grenache Blanc, and then the rest is Macabeo. In previous vintages, they used to include Viognier in the blend, but they've gone all parochial and decided to only keep the Nelin to indigenous varietals. I think the thing that appeals to me the most is the texture, and Luis Gutierrez in his notes speaks a lot about the austerity of this wine at an early stage. But as a result of that, you're getting a really clean, accurate reflection of the terroir. And so to a certain degree, it's more of an academic kind of wine, and also something that should never be drunk in the first couple of years of release. So we're fortunate to have the 15, 17, I think, or 18 being the current release for the rest. I love the silkiness on the palate. There's something kind of essential and and really, really finished and highly polished on the palate. It's not something that one gets from a wine that doesn't see, well, it's unusual for me to find this in a wine that is not put into concrete at some point in its process. And I suspect that this one sees a fair bit of concrete before going into oak. I understand that the fermentation period, depending on the vintage, is somewhere between 5 days and 15 months, which is an extraordinary length of time. And that's defined, I suppose, by the grape types and just how they figure that blend every time. I know that when I was last in Spain with Lou, I think it was in Rioja, we were looking at Tempranillo Blanc, which at the time was relatively new. It would be now about 6 or 8 years ago. Definitely the winemaking techniques are tending in towards this concrete fermentation as opposed to oak. I think what they did here was initial concrete fermentation, and then mellow in new oak, and then into the bottle. I think for me, the money shot is the silkiness. I think it's just glorious. And I've been fortunate to taste this one for a while, and it's definitely evolving the way Gutierrez speaks about in Wine Advocate, this needing more and more time to develop. It's really in a smart place now. It's by no means an inexpensive wine, but I'm a huge fan.
Sorry, Rob, what are the grapes and what are the percentages again?
Sure. Grant, I can't give a specific breakdown of the percentages, but this particular vintage is Grenache Blanc and Macabeo, and it's predominantly Grenache Blanc. I have an idea that it's something like 85 or 90% Grenache Blanc. Comes from an area called Prado in just outside Barcelona, about 40 kilometers south, and it's inland from the coast, but not very far. So you have a geographical experience not unlike that of Stellenbosch, for example, where you're getting the ocean breezes caught up against the mountain. It's that kind of geographical construction that's allowing for this this beautiful balance. It's getting a lot of moisture in a country that really doesn't see terribly much at all, but it's getting a lot of ocean, maritime moisture at certain times of the year. For me tonight, I'm finding a little bit of fortified. I don't know whether it's just the time of the week for me, I don't know what it is, where I'm just seeing something that's just a little bit of that, and it's not something that I've noticed before. I think what appeals to me a lot about it is it has a lot of the fullness and heaviness of I guess a really good quality Chardonnay, but there's an aromatic zest, there's an aromatic content to it. That acid component brings something new to the game as a wine. Very tiny operation. I think that Mogador in its entirety is 2,000 hectares. In Spanish terms, that's really not a lot of land. It's also, the guy who makes this wine also produces something called Espectacle de Montsant Grenache, which is furiously expensive, but I think at the moment it's certainly the best Grenache I've ever tasted out of Spain, pure Grenache. I think these days, last time I saw it in the retail space in Spain, it was about 130 euros a bottle, and even at that insane price, it was almost worth buying. One of the accusations that's thrown against Priorat is it's so super trendy that they can command these incredibly high prices relative to Rioja. And I certainly agree with the notion that, generally speaking, bang for your buck, Rioja is the place to go. But Priorat is certainly producing some of the most exciting wines in Spain at the moment. So onto the reds. I guess as an exercise, it might be useful to just examine the phenolics first. I was saying to Grant, I think, what was super interesting when I opened the wines earlier tonight, the number 2, the Contino from Cune, it's the De Olivia 2016, was so fragrant and forward. It was definitely giving me, oh, it was Sid we were talking about, so fragrant and forward, definitely giving so much at an early stage relative to the rest. But I have a sneaky feeling that now with this double decanting and what have you, I think we're seeing, we're probably going to see some differences in the phenolics now. There's a beautiful sweetness in number 2. For me, the Muga number 3, the nose is still a little bit closed, but there's a darkness. There's something kind of swarthy about the nose that's really, really interesting. Really, really, there's a sort of damp, dark richness about it. Number 4 is also from this Contino wine subcategory of the Cune range. If anybody's interested in looking in more detail at Cune, we're doing an extensive tasting with the Cune winemaker towards the end of February, and we'll have a look more at it. Cune is quite proud of this Contino range as being what they maintain is the very first estate wine in Spain, or in Rioja definitely. And by that, what they mean is, originally Rioja was all about these various plots of grapes that were put together and blended in large volume. The Contino is 62 hectares. It's now about 65-year-old vines, and everything that comes under the Contino label under Cune is that specific vineyard only. So it's something that was a major departure for certainly for Rioja some 60 years ago. What's interesting about number 4, the Gran Reserva, is that spends additional year in bottle, and it's from the 14, which is a spectacular vintage. What's really interesting is number 2, also from Contino, is and a slightly humbler wine in terms of its construct, is off the charts for me. So I don't know if you'd agree, but I think that 2016 is going to easily eclipse 2014, wines 2 and 4 in contrast, despite the fact that wine number 4 is a Gran Reserva.
2 feels a lot better.
2, yeah. It's just, see, it's kind of deft and sweet, and there's everything about it seems in the right place for me, Sid.
Yep.
The palate weight, there's increased silkiness about the wine. It's just more interesting and more beautiful by comparison.
It reminds me of the, the lower end Napa Valley sorts, the Overture by Opus One and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
Very,
I would argue that it has that sweetness, that kind of brightness. But I'd argue that the Olivia is generally a little bit more deft, a little bit more eloquent than a lot of the Napas at this early stage. I'd say that Napa 16, Overture, for example, any of those, there's a bit more fleshiness. There's a bit more kind of broad mid palate, and I think that's why I'm so attracted to number 2. Is it doesn't have that. It certainly has rich fruit, but it's just beautifully structured. I think the architecture.
The structure is better, yes.
I'm glad I put in this Gran Reserva just as a sort of sanity check, because I've been becoming increasingly obsessed with Spain in 2016. You'll see wine number 6 tonight. The Clos Mogador is also 16.
Sorry, Rob, what is the primary grape of 1 or of 2? Sorry.
Of 2, I've got it all written down. Oh, it's all 10% Graziano and 90% Tempranillo. And the number 4, by contrast, is 100% Tempranillo.
Okay.
I'm wondering if the Graziano is not a big contributor to that slight sweetness to the wine. I've never tasted pure Graciano, so I wouldn't know. I think what appeals to me about the Olivo number 2 is this sleekness. I wrote racy earlier on, and that's a sort of easy throwaway definition, but it comes back to me again.
I think maybe it would be interesting to try the 4 as a 2016 beside the 2 as a 2016.
Yeah. They'll definitely declare Gran Reserva, but this 14 is the current Gran Reserva release. So I guess there'll be a 15 and a 16. So we're probably about 2 to 2.5 years away from seeing Gran Reserva 16.
No, that would be the interesting thing to see what the 10% makes a difference.
Yeah. I can't think, Lou, is there a similar grape that you've encountered in Italy? I don't have any reference for you. Is it like a Viognier? But what is it?
No, Graciano is its own thing, but Contino. So the CVNE Contino mob make a straight Graciano as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which we've sold. I believe we sold out of. We only have an allocation of 24 bottles, so we sold out of that. We may have a bottle left. I don't know. I haven't looked at the site, but so they make a straight Graciano. The only thing I'd say about 2014 in Spain is, unlike Italy, where it was tough, Spain it wasn't too bad. It was better than average. But you sort of mentioned earlier that you thought it was a spectacular vintage. It wasn't. It was okay.
Okay.
It was okay.
Then from a winemaking point of view, the Olivo, it's Malo in all new French oak. So they spend a lot of money, which kind of, the Olivo number 2, which kind of explains
they spend a lot of money there. They spend a lot of money in that winery. They're very proud of it.
Yeah.
I'm sure when we catch up with the CVNE winemaker in a couple of weeks' time, she'll make a lot of noise about it, because it's much smaller production. They put a lot of money into it.
Yeah, 62 hectares. It's nothing, right? Yeah. And then apparently after Malo, it goes into a mix of French, American, and Hungarian for 18 months. So it's a complicated process. They're working to a goal, I would say, and they're probably getting there.
Beautiful nose.
It's sensational. I'm just trying to think of the difference in price between the Gran Reserva and the Olivo. I don't have that number in front of me.
What are you looking for, sir?
The difference is, I know the Olivo is 115, I think, or 110. Yeah, how much is the Gran Reserva?
Contino. Much cheaper.
Is it cheaper?
Gran Reserva is nearly half the price. Looking on Vina.
I'm tasting half the value, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's because of the Graciano grape, but it's there's not a lot of it, frankly. And the oak treatment against is new oak. It's a different animal to the Gran Reserva.
And then also technique-wise, the Gran Reserva is going into concrete and then into new oak, mixture of French and USA for 2 years, and then it gets 3 years bottling.
Right, which is all very funky by Spanish. I mean, you'd never find anyone in Rioja doing that sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, as I said earlier, that white, I can't remember the producer, but it was hipster central, wherever we visited. Everyone had beers and ironic expressions, and they were promoting a really expensive white Tempranillo, which was all in concrete. I remember taking pictures at the time. But
white Tempranillo is very sexy now. Very sexy.
Yeah.
So all right. So the Graciano.
Yeah.
We've actually got 3 bottles of the 2015.
Oh, I'm super interested to look at that. I might check for one.
The Gran Reserva 14. And so the Graciano is $110.
Right.
This stuff here, the Gran Reserva is $69, and the Contino Vina de Olivo is 110 as well.
110.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm all over that.
A big step up.
Yeah. So by comparison, how much was the Muga number 3?
Oh, that'll be about 110 for sure.
Oh, I'd be all over the Olivo before the Muga, I think, just in terms of.
Yeah, but it's just hard to get. That's it. We're done.
Yeah.
We can't get any more.
I must say the Muga, Luis and Monica Lana as well were saying that this is probably the finest Muga Prado Enea in many years, and I can kind of see that. But I think whereas the Olivo is starting to show more of its character now, I think that for me the Prado is still really tight and really closed. Even as it's got warmer, you can see the DNA of the wine is there, but it's not particularly flamboyant tonight for me.
Well, we were lucky enough to get the Prado Enea. They don't make every year, but they made it in 09, 10, and 11.
And then there's nothing more until there's a 2-year gap now.
I think the next one's 14, actually.
Yeah. 12 and 13 doesn't happen, and then 14.
Correct. And the 14, just hitting the market now. The ratings on it are nowhere near as stellar as the 10 and 11, that's for sure. So I haven't tried it yet, but certainly the rating, I think the one rating I did see for is a 93 from Tim Atkinson.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's pretty hard. I mean, once you've had a couple of years at 98, 99.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
But the price is actually higher. So,
I guess that's a macro shift, right? That's the world deciding that Spain's a cooler place to buy wine than it used to be, and all those factors, I suppose.
I guess so. But, it's going to be a bit of a hard act to follow after. I'm trying to get more 11 if I can find some.
Oh, hell yeah. It's a long time since, I don't know how much we originally had of 11, but it vanished really fast. And then it's so interesting with the internet where obviously someone has a dinner and there's a group of clients who have tasted the wine at the dinner. And I think the clearance was a couple of weeks later where I did 5 trades in one morning off a cluster of people. You'd obviously had it the night before and decided to list it.
We had 25 dozen, and once people had the first sip of it, it disappeared really quickly.
Yeah.
Quick question, mate.
Yeah.
So the Muga is 100% Tempranillo, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, and the Olivo, what is that? It just actually tastes quite different.
It's 90% Tempranillo and 10% this grape. But I would argue that a lot of that differential is about how they've fermented the wine, the oak treatment, etc. That's really defining. They've spent a ton of money on the Olivo, and I think it's paid off from a sort of strategic point of view. I think it's showing fantastically well.
It's a lot more complex. I mean, the Muga I quite like. I like the Tempranillo, but this is actually quite. I get a lot of vanilla. It's a lot more depth to it than the. Yeah, it's a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of finish to it. There's this kind of patina, this glossy, beautiful, sensual finish that's really sets it apart. It's worth the extra
rather than the 10% of whatever else.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I've got to say, I don't know how many people have gone to number 5, but talk about a gear change. So you're now in Toro, which is, if you know the sort of the face of Spain, where the Portuguese are the face, Toro is kind of the beauty spot, which is just a little bit east of the Portuguese border. It has the distinction of being vineyards at 700 meters above sea level. It has a climatic differential of -11 degrees to 37 degrees, which is absolutely, I don't think even the Argentinians have that kind of thing on their mountain range. So it's really quite extraordinary, unique place. I had the misfortune to get lost there. I got off a train, and I'll never forget being quite as exposed to the heat because it was so hot. If I didn't get inside, I was convinced I was going to melt. And as those of you who know me, there's a lot of melting to do. I really thought I was going to be in serious trouble that day. Geez, it's hot. So it's very arid, it's very sandy. Toro only got its DOC back in the late 80s, but as a place, apparently the Greeks started making wine there about 150 years BC. So it has this beautiful history. I think the most interesting aspect of it in our sort of recent experiences is when phylloxera hit Europe. This was one of the few places that didn't get affected, mainly because it's just so isolated. And the viticulturists will say that has a lot to do with this arid, sandy soil. And it ended up that the Spanish, the Torinesians, whatever the word is, actually donated a lot of their roots cuttings to the French. For me, there's what Numanthia is the absolute best of this. This is their estate label. 100-year-old vines. They say 100-year-olds plus. Tinta del Toro, which is the regional name for Tempranillo, so 100% Tempranillo again. But wow, in a completely different style, right? You're getting this fine sort of potpourri kind of component, sort of powdered tannin. It's just a totally different animal from a construct point of view.
Rob, it's just, like I said, it's a step change. I think I've just been given a smack in the gut. I want to go and start barbecuing my steak right now.
It's so amazing. If you just think like it's the same kind of terroir, it's the same grape varietal, but totally different game. It really is blinding. I think the thing that's made Numanthia definitely the most famous winery in Toro is over time it evolves from a fairly primary dusty kind of component to something that's quite integrated and flowing, and we're starting to see that movement now in this 15.
Very big tannins, deep.
Yeah, I think that if it was at an earlier stage, it might show less fruit and be more kind of arid and difficult on the palate. But you're starting to see that beautiful integration between the fruits and the oak. I think it's a really special wine. But oh geez, do you need animal fat to go with this, right?
Yeah.
Or 100 different options.
It's a barbecue wine. That's all it is.
Yeah. At the price it is, it's an expensive barbecue, but yeah.
Sorry. Braised beef with mashed potato, Rob, just for.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, anything like that would be amazing.
What's the grape varietal in number 3 again? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Tempranillo.
It's also
The Muga.
pure Tempranillo?
Yeah. That's what's so exciting, because I mean, the wine critics often throw this word hedonistic around, and Muga really shows that, or it's hinting at that. I think in time it's going to demonstrate more of that, whereas Numanthia is kind of fleeting and kind of supple. It's a totally different interpretation on the style. But for me, there's a promise in number 5, Numanthia. There's a promise of even further integration and this kind of fluidity. I remember about 3 years ago, Lou, I'm sure we sold a batch of this out of investment wines. I'm sure we had a little bit of Numanthia.
Yeah, we've sold a few.
Yeah, and it might have been 10 or 12, I can't remember, but I was struck over the time that we held it by how it dramatically had evolved over time. It's certainly not a commercial release kind of wine. It's not something you drink.
Yeah, I have a sneaking suspicion that it's been taken over by LVMH.
Oh, really? That kind of makes sense. I mean, being the creme de la creme of that region, it sort of makes sense from a strategic point of view for them.
I'm pretty sure, because the last time I went to buy it, I was directed towards the Great Monster. So,
Yeah,
okay.
LVMH has bought it.
There you go.
Have they? Okay. All right.
Yeah, it was quite something else to sort of talk to someone about Cloudy Bay and Numanthia in the same.
Oh, but mate, the whole world's changing with this whole thing. You know, the negotiants are picking up Jim Barry Amar is being sold out of Paris now. It's just the world's gone mad.
Well, we just bought some.
Yeah. Can you believe it? It's almost un-Australian.
No. So I ring South Australia. I talked to Jim Barry's staff. I say, can I buy some of your wine? He said, sure. Ring this fella in Paris. Oh. Okay.
There's something wrong about that. Definitely something wrong.
No problem.
It's called globalization, guys.
Oh,
Or a pain in the ass, whichever one you want to use.
just nonsense, right? Anyway, it is what it is. The interesting thing, though, is because the Bordelais, La Place, as they call it, the French negotiation clearing place, has now picked up most of the Italian wines that you all know and love. Jim Barry Armagh will only be available from Frenchmen going forward. Go figure.
The entire range, or just the Amar? Right. Right.
And Wins Riddoch.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, but this whole premium thing in Australia has gone mental. I got an offer from somebody in London today for Yalumba, blah, 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 single vineyard Cabernet, something, for £275 a bottle.
Nice.
A single vineyard Cabernet. I mean, I just can't believe that it seems to be this like everybody's trying to spit off a super premium for the global markets. Everyone's kind of.
Yeah, it's not your first rodeo. You've seen this cycle before. Right?
Yeah.
Every single winery tries this. They take the Californian approach, right? Put it in a big, heavy bottle, throw a bunch of new oak at it, say some sacred prayer over the top of it, make sure it's in a wooden box, and see who
has to be in a wooden box. Yeah.
Has to be in a wooden box. We've seen this before.
I've got to say that with the Numanthia, where this one excels, a lot of the region falls down. This has beautiful fruit, this kind of supple, beautiful sensual fruit, whereas a lot of Toro is kind of chunky and it's more about tannin. It doesn't have.
Well, whenever I think of Toro, I just think of heat. I mean, it's just...
Dude, there's nothing else there but heat and dust. It's like Alice Springs in midsummer.
I was going to be there. I was frying my own fat.
There was a moment. I'll never forget. I think they invited me to. Remember a couple of years ago, I went and did a tasting there, and I'll never forget arriving at downtown Toro. I forget the name of the town, wearing my little, racing red sneakers and stuff, and getting off the train. I felt like it was almost a Priscilla Queen of the Desert moment, because there were just tumbleweeds and just dust and spray and just, so I couldn't get into the hotel until lunchtime. So I went into the Spanish equivalent of an RSL, and I tried to order something in English. You gotta forget it. I'm surprised I survived the experience. It was a scary time.
Well, they're all sitting there waiting for Don Quixote to arrive, and in you walk. Culturally, I mean, they're probably still in shock.
Yeah. Over the years I've had dirty looks, but an entire bar of dirty looks, it wasn't great.
Oh, no, you've had plenty of those. You just didn't notice. In Sicily, they wanted to string you up. They were going to make a big salami out of you. They were very happy to do that. You just weren't aware.
I just didn't know.
You had no idea. You're totally oblivious. Most of my relatives in the Veneto took one look at you and went, "What the hell have you done?"
Tell.
So, seriously, like this Numanthia thing, now that it's LVMH, hopefully they won't change the formula too much, right?
Yeah. They only produce, I think, 4 labels. There's 1 white and 2 other reds, I think. I'm not sure of the varietal constructs, and I haven't tasted the rest. I don't think I've ever had a look at them.
So what's the main grape in this Numanthia?
All Tempranillo.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It's really exciting to see it as the sort of certainly something that stands out in the pack, because all the other Tempranillos are all about this unctuous, rich fruit. But there's something just a little bit different about well, there's actually a lot that's different about their expression of Tempranillo. And I really love it. I really love that powderiness, that powdery tannin is gorgeous.
Yeah, I'd say it really holds up really well too. It will age very, very well.
Yeah, you're right, Dave. I can't even think of a similar flavor profile anywhere else in the world with that beautiful level of that powdery tannin. I can't think of anywhere else that manifests that so early on.
Yeah, we should point out though that Rob and I have been, or sometimes lucky, sometimes unlucky enough to try some very, very old Spanish wines. When we went on our first tour there, it was right after 2008, the debacle, and so restaurants were coughing up their cellars in order to just get some cash flow. It was a really horrible, horrible time, and we went and visited quite a few private cellars throughout Spain, and we picked up a lot of extraordinary wines. But the one thing we found was that Tempranillo actually oxidizes less than any other grape in the world. So its ability to age is actually the best of any grape on the planet, and that's now been proven chemically by the people who, the propeller heads. But we've had 60-year-old and 70-year-old Tempranillos, which are just fresh as a daisy. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. Do you remember that really simple, what's the name of the producer? It was like a €5 Faustino. So we had some 64 Faustino, which had been sitting, lying around in Rioja, and even taking away the price from it, just looking at it in its standalone condition, amazing wine. Just really incredibly good wine.
Yeah, unfortunately, 2 years after we did that, we discovered all that. Majestic Wines out of the UK.
Yeah, they went and stuffed it up, right?
Just took everything.
Yeah. There was a great story behind that, and I'll hopefully edit this before I put it online. But the story was that there was some counselor or something that couldn't get bribed in cash, so he was bribed in wine, and that was the seller that eventually was the deceased estate that we encountered. I think that's how the story went. So the only way he could hide his bribery was to be paid in wine back in the 60s. Hence an entire mountain full of incredible wine. And the storage was so fantastic. It was just, beautifully kept and really intact. It was wonderful.
Remember the other surprise of that tour was when we were at Rioja, Muga and CVNE. They had that train outside of one of the wineries. It was it was a monument to how much wine was shipped from that part of Spain to France. Remember?
Yes.
Because France was struggling with volumes, and so it was Spanish that was shipping absolute trainloads of wine into France, and they would rebottle it as Cabernet blend.
Who needs legislation anyway?
It was going on for 40 years.
Oh, that's fantastic. I thought you were going to mention the time that you and I ate 70 baby back lamb ribs at 11 o'clock in the morning. I think it might have been Muga, because the Spanish feed you wherever you go. So we did like that whole Rioja. There's about 5 of those wineries in that little pan.
That was Muga. It was Mr. Muga.
Oh, it was good.
I'm just trying to find you at the Clos Mogador number 6.
Yeah.
And there's a few different labels here.
Okay, so this is the premium Clos Mogador. It's mainly, 50% of it is Grenache, 30% Carignan, 16 Syrah, and the rest Cabernet. So it's, I guess, the international style rather than the traditional varietals of Spain.
Okay, so from Priorat. in Spain? Is that what we're talking? Sorry, I'm just trying to.
We're talking Priorat, which is Catalonia, the sort of southeast of Spain,
Okay.
away from the rest here.
There's a few different. When I put the mic, there's a few different ones come up. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. This is definitely the premium estate range. This wine, this is 98 points from Wine Advocates, and I would actually at this juncture maybe suggest that if one was following points, Suckling has an obsession with Spain at the moment, and very, very much higher rated points. I quite enjoy Luis Gutierrez's influence from Wine Advocates, a little bit more conservative. And here, this is one of the highest ratings that he gave for the vintage anywhere. 15% alcohol. The big question, the debate was, who feels 15% is a lot of alcohol, really. Which of the two wines, number 5 or number 6, are showing more alcohol in the drinking experience? It's quite tricky because number 5, the Numanthia, is a far more subtler interpretation of the grape. When you enter number 6, it's fat and oily and unctuous. It's about tobacco, all those kind of flavors. It's showing a very different kind of expression.
Yeah, but I'm not getting any alcohol heat though.
No, I'm not either. Yeah, it's just super interesting because it's literally 50% of the altitude of Numanthia. It's just a completely different, a different interpretation. It's interesting, Lou, because you and I have drunk their Spectacle Grenache with El Jefe. I forgot his real name now. We've drunk the Spectacle made by the same guy, and that's 16% alcohol, and it's all, you know, it's got a lot of booze attached to it. So
Yeah.
His winemaking style is to lean into the more extracted kind of result. And for my money, saying that number 6 is showing a little bit more alcohol than the number 5.
Hey, do you remember where Ringland set up? He was making a special right?
Priorat, yeah, and he makes some in and some in Toro as well. Right. And the stuff that he makes in Toro is very smart. It's really, really good.
Is he still doing?
Yeah.
That'd be
so
worth.
Sorry.
That'd be worth finding if I can find it.
Yeah, I tasted it on that Priscilla trip. I don't remember who distributed it at the time. Yeah, Sam, you're right. 49% Grenache. It's interesting because the Carignan in the Mogador, I'm not seeing what I normally look for in Carignan. I'm thinking of Carignan out of France, and it's not the same. It's not showing the same kind of characters at all.
What do you get from Carignan normally? Spice?
Well, I'm looking for a sort of a kind of linear, herbaceous kind of component, but something that's quite lean. It's not something, certainly out of Rhone. What I'm finding out of Rhone is that it lends a certain tannic structure and some perfume. Whereas here, I think the Carignan, if I'm recognizing it all, is more lush and more expressive.
So more like Petit Verdot than it is like...
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had a straight Carignan.
The Spanish make a fair bit of it. The French don't. I don't think I've ever, and I don't think I've ever seen it in Rhone or anywhere else.
I think they do it in Sardinia. I must find some. I'll find some.
Oh, of course. Sardis Pater. Haven't we ever? I don't think we might have sold some 100% Carignan before. I think we might have.
Carignano and Carignano.
Yeah.
I assume it's the same damn thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But Sardinian Carignano is rich and supple, and it's
correct. It's also a function of the heat. There's incredible heat, low altitude, and very sandy soil. So it's almost not even worth comparing them as similar varietals. They're actually different families altogether.
Yeah, I tell you what, the nose on this number 2 just keeps on getting better, though.
Yeah, it's crazy good. It's crazy good. So when you were doing the buying, is this one quite hard to get? Is it?
The Contino is a little gem, so it's all
well, you know,
special project area.
We really need to go there because we've only really represented Contino last 6 months, Contino, right? And my reading.
Have you heard of this thing called the virus?
Yeah, I got an email. You know, someone sent me an email. I don't know. But it seems like the marketing behind Contino is like really aggressive. And there was even an article in Forbes magazine about apparently that they spent 81 million euros buying the Contino vineyard. And at the time, that was a huge amount of money. Puno is certainly a fantastic success story, but I was wondering if they weren't kind of falling in love a little bit with the notion of the single vineyard characteristic, but I kind of get it. They've really nailed it, certainly with the Contino. With the Olivo, I'm not so jazzed about the Gran Reserva. Yeah.
Well, I think you've lined up the winemaker, right, on the 24th of February.
Yeah.
Ask her or him, her?
Yeah, to her. We'll ask her. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
So can I ask about the Contino? Because I think it's delicious, but it seems a bit light. So is that going to
number
age?
2 or number 4?
2.
Number two. Dave, I'm not picking up that. I sense a trajectory with that number 2. I actually really think it's gonna mature well.
No, I think it's great right now, but
I
suspect
suspect
it doesn't have so much weight. No?
Well, I think the winning formula are these superfine tannins, and so the question is, will those tannins evolve over time? And my money's on yes, it will. Very often, I hear what you're saying. When the tannins are this good this early, does it have a future? I'd probably put some money on it having a future.
Dave, I don't think it's meant to be a heavyweight. I think it's meant to be a middleweight.
Mm.
The question is whether it will age. I think the answer to that is yes. But it has. I agree with you. It hasn't got the weight of. It's not a Muhammad Ali, that's for sure. It's a
No,
middleweight.
right now, I drink it all day long. Right now.
I think that's supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be middleweight wine.
I think the critics will argue that. They'll say that this is a wine that's engineered for a market for an early release, that kind of expression. But I think it's got some great DNA in it. Just incredible. The Muga's finally waking up. I'm getting a lot more savory, that sort of bacon fat. I don't want to, we'll call it chorizo instead of pancetta. It'd be un-Spanish to call it chorizo, pancetta. There's definitely that savory, meaty kind of thing that's finally coming up.
Yeah.
Amazing palate depth. It's just, if you line all of this up and you look for just that component in the wine as a quality, undoubtedly it's got the best.
So what's this number 4 thing? What is it?
Number 4 is the Gran Reserva, Contino.
Well, it's getting beaten up by all its neighbours.
Totally beaten up. I kind of put it in there unfairly as like a benchmark just to see.
Kristen's giving me that one a drink.
It's definitely a run to the litter.
Yeah, undoubtedly. It's not improving either because as the others are evolving, it's just,
It's a bit unfair, but insofar as it's up against some pretty impressive company, but it shows how a lineup like this there's nowhere to hide, right?
Yeah, correct.
If you don't bring the thunder, you don't bring the thunder. And this thing's short. Cool.
That being said,
I'm loving the fattiness of number 6. Like, I'm glad I put it right at the end because I suspected it would have that oily, that sort of round mid-palate fat about it, and it's definitely showing that as it warms up.
I was going to suggest roast pork with this one, but maybe that's a bit weird.
Porchetta, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Or Iberico. In fact, I've actually got a slab of it in my fridge. I'm just thinking about that right now. Do you know,
what happened to your vegan thing?
Oh no, I just look at it whenever I want to torture myself. I look at it and it's been there since last January. It's been sitting there for a year. But do you know, Kristen, that the price of Iberico is destroyed at the moment. It's gone. It's almost more than doubled because of the demand for Iberico pork around the world. It's become way too expensive.
Cheddar with 6 would be just like snap on.
Well, you know that whole story, Lou, about a fantastic young wine is it's what the wine's going to look like when it gets older. There's a detailing in the Muga that justifies the 99 points from Suckling. The tannic detail and the fruit and the poise and the balance of the wine, it just ticks the boxes in every regard. It's almost beguiling. There's nothing wrong anywhere in that wine. It doesn't step out.
To be fair, it's improved remarkably since we poured it.
Yeah.
So it obviously needs a little bit of time to fill its boots.
Yeah. It's interesting to get a wine that has that matrix of flavor without being heavy. It's
Not
just,
heavy at all.
yeah. There's just no effort required at all with drinking the wine.
Well, it's light on the street. It's impressive. Impressive.
All right, before I get you hammered, shall we do votes for wine of the night? So it's hard to put a white again, so we might just do the reds only. So if you want to put in the group chat the votes for number 1, Olivo. I got 1. And the doolies, I know how you guys vote, right? It's like 2 of you, then there's a group vote, then there's a later ratification.
We're in.
We get about 7 votes out of your household.
Then they have a recount.
It's the test of our marriage. We actually both agreed the same one this time.
That's got to be a first.
First time.
All right, so we got the doolies are voting for number 5. Okay, 2 checks. Sam's going for Andrew's going for number 3. Oh, it's a spread field tonight. That's awesome. Olivia, Kylie's going for 1. 4. Dave, it's contentious vote, but I hear you. How good is that wine?
Yeah.
I thought I was kind of having a bit of a bromance with it, but it's amazing. No, you can't have a second. It's all or nothing, mate. It's like the Georgia runoffs. You can't get 2 chances.
Okay, I was gonna buy both, but I'll just buy one. Okay, no worries. Thank you. Save me money.
You teaching, Dave.
So, Mamit, we got you. Number 2. Got it. Luigi's number 5.
Di's number 5 as well.
Di, what do you got? Number 5 as well. Number 4.
5.
Okay. Well, that's super interesting because, for the initial post-exit poll, it looks like number 5 is going to be the winner, which is extraordinary. It's super interesting because we're seeing Prado, which is this dynamic, amazingly cool, hipster, popular region, and Rioja, which is so famous for hundreds of years. Now we have Toro, Numanthia just blitzing it, and I guess I agree. WK 2 and 5. Okay, there's 2 of you. As a percentage of the votes, number 5, the Numanthia, has just blitzed it in a big way. It's really interesting.
It really is.
Well, it's great because it changes my perspective on the value coefficient of Prado. Ribera del Duero, which is another region that's incredibly expensive and made famous by the likes of Vega and what have you. Kind of wonder, I would rather spend $110 on the Numanthia than $140 on Allion from Vega.
Numanthia or however the hell you pronounce
it,
is actually $79.
Really? I thought it was 100. That's great value.
That's $80.
Yeah.
The Gran Reserva is not too bad either, by the way, mate. I'm just.
Really, are you warming to it? we might have to invite you for a guest spot on the Kune tasting, mate.
Definitely.
Well, you know what they say. There's a tradecraft says that you look at the number of empty bottles at the end of a tasting and see what the most popular wine is. And for me, it's number 5 followed by number 1. Right? Those are the two that I really love. Yeah.
Okay, interestingly, Rob, it's actually 100-year-old vines it's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In fact, probably, Lou, just given what that place looks like, it would be hard to find anyone who's brave enough to plant new vines there. Everything's probably inherited from, I mean, if it hasn't got a root at this point, it's probably not going to get one. It's so arid. It's a moonscape.
You don't want to say that to an Australian. Anyway, the interesting thing was, remember when we were going through there, how low the vines are to the ground. Backbreakingly difficult. You can't do it by machine either. All the vines, they're not trellised. They're just single.
Oh, it's almost like bush vines in Africa. They just love
they're the bush vines. So they stand about 18 inches or thereabouts, 1.5 to 2 feet off the ground. Really difficult.
So Rob,
Like a bush, like Chateauneuf, like kind of a bush.
Yeah, it is a bush, Dave.
It sounds like it, Dave. Yeah.
Very low. Chateauneuf, it's a lot higher, but the Spanish one, especially the old gnarled Grenache and Tempranillo, really low to the ground.
Grant, you wanted to say something?
I'm just curious. Is it irrigation then? How do they sustain the
laziness? It might be laziness, Lou. You know, Western Europe.
Oh, it's capital, right? You need capital to trellis stuff.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
No, but they must be irrigated though. There must be. I mean, the wine areas in Australia.
No, not necessarily. No. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
They're rarely irrigated. The new vineyards are, but they're rarely irrigated.
Grant, my experience of Portugal, which I'm determined to get my arms around before I get too old. A lot of the original Portuguese vines are left to grow along the ground, a completely different approach, especially closer to the ocean. Apparently, they just grow and get what they can, which is quite extraordinary from a commercial point of view. It's hardly the high yields that the New World looks for per acre.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
That is super fascinating, actually.
Yeah.